Thank you so much for coming and logging in into our today's first session, 921 Heritage Talks, and we welcome you all. My name is Marvi Mazhar. I'm the founder and creative head of Pakistan Chowk Community Center. Pakistan Chowk Community Center was established a few years ago, where we had an actual space and we started a lot of cultural and advocacy interaction with Old Town. And then during the COVID, because of the complications of handling a physical space, we went absolutely digital. Our ongoing projects are Heritage Walk Karachi, documentation of Old Town, and now we are, this is our first project where we are working on Heritage Dialogue, which will happen every 6 months. And we have some incredible lineup for next 8 sessions. And we hope that we form a community and alliance between the network of South Asia platform. And we welcome you all to be participants and friends of Heritage Talks. I would like to now introduce this project. As you all know, that I have been working towards negotiating and working in figuring out like how Heritage Old Town can be part of the urban planning and a conversation between today's new building towards old building. How can they both amalgamate and become part of design mechanisms? And it's been a very, very difficult query in terms of how do we marriage between the real estate development as well as keeping intact how the living heritage is understood by various stakeholders, be it activists, urban planners, architects, residents of Old Town, and all of these questions are very important. So our next 8 sessions are going to be surrounding a lot of those kind of queries. If you have any ideas and you would like to be part of it, please email us and let us know. I would now like to invite Aksa to give an introduction for our amazing speaker who's going to be sharing some really interesting of her research. And we would request all our guests to please switch off your video and mic so that, it doesn't create any kind of disturbance while our speaker is in conversation.
Hello, everyone. I'm Aksa. Welcome to our first webinar, and today's topic is real estate and heritage. We have Shaheera with us, who will be talking about the topic in detail. For now, I will read out the abstract. जो हमारा आज webinar का abstract है, मैं वो पढ़ूंगी. I will start reading abhi. I hope I'm audible. Real estate and heritage. Pakistan's heritage is centuries old, and remnants of the past can be seen everywhere. From coastal towns to mountains up north, historical sites and architectural buildings are a testament to our diverse history. However, many of these sites are threatened by erasure in the form of neglect, but also by development projects. As our cities continue to expand and modernize, it is important for us to inquire what obstructions come in the way of heritage preservation. In rapidly changing urban and rural landscapes, what options do we have to safeguard historic buildings? Can we find a common ground between development and preservation of our heritage sites? What solutions can there be for the preservation of communal identities that are threatened by urbanization and real estate developers? Over to you, Shaheera.
Thank you so much, Aksa. Let me just quickly share my screen. There we go. Right. I hope you can all see my screen now. So thank you so much, Aksa, Marvi, and the Pakistan Chowk Community Center team for inviting me and giving me this platform to not only talk about my research in Gwadar, but also to understand and further discuss the perils facing the historic environment in Pakistan. Now, before I start my presentation, I would just like to flag 2 things. One, that in this presentation, there are a lot of references to the city of Karachi and Gwadar, and that's only because these are the contexts that I'm most familiar with. And number two, that most of the information and whatever I'll be saying in this presentation is through secondary research and some on-ground fieldwork in Gwadar. But most of my information is through news articles, research papers, and it might be possible that the on-ground politics much more nuanced and complex than what I present here to be. Now, Pakistan, as we all know, is endowed with a large number of ancient and historical sites, from archaeological sites like Mumjadaro, which are remnants of ancient civilizations, to grand monuments like Shalimar Gardens, Badshahi Mosque, which represent the different dynasties that have, been empowered in Pakistan throughout the decades, and to different urban historic architecture and urban historic codes, each of whom have their own distinct architectural styles, histories, and memories. However, this heritage is now more than ever under constant threat of erasure due to neglect, urbanization, and modernization. In an era where words like smart city, skyline, tall skyscrapers are emphasized as seen as ideals of development, where does the heritage go? Does the heritage belong in the space or not? Is there a space for heritage when the emphasis is to create more Dubai-like mega cities? Can we find a common ground between development and preservation of heritage sites? These are some of the questions that I will try to address in my talk today. Now, before I actually delve into the topic of real estate and heritage, I'm just going to give you a quick overview of what the presentation would look like. So first, I'll begin with defining the terms both heritage and real estate. Then I'll sort of problematize the concept of real estate versus heritage. Then based on the above discussion, I'll bring in the example of Gwadar, where real estate is a very big, project that is happening, and it sort of threatens the heritage of Gwadar city. And then in the end, I will try to merge everything that we've talked about into, trying to, like as Marvi said, make a marriage between real estate and heritage instead of a contesting tension. So what is heritage and what constitutes heritage? According to UNESCO, it is a cultural legacy which we inherit from the past, but we also live in the present and something which we pass on to future generations. So heritage very broadly can be defined into two things, tangible heritage and intangible heritage. Now in this presentation, even though I'll heavily focus on the tangible heritage, which is the built heritage, but it is also important to remember that the built heritage is not without its intangible heritage, which is the stories, the memories, and the cultural attachments that come as part of it. Real estate. Now, what exactly is real estate? Real estate can be anything which is a property consists of land and has buildings on it along with its natural resources. It could be farmlands, crops, anything of that sort. Now, when we really talk about real estate in Pakistan, I think we focus more on the development of housing and the projects that are up and coming. But it's also important to understand that the real estate also includes external bodies as well, such as CPEC, which is my focus in my research on Gwadar. So here are some of the examples of developers and external bodies that are currently working on the real estate market in Pakistan. For instance, Ravi Riverfront Urban Development Project, and you can see what the vision of the Ravi city looks like on the top of the slide. And then we have the ARY Laguna DHA city, which will be the first ever beach resort-like city in Pakistan. And an example, the vision of that city is displayed on the bottom of the slide. Then we have KDA, Bahria Town. These are all developers and they play a very important role in the real estate market. Now, when we have such visions of Dubai-like mega city to have the tallest building ever, the tallest mosque ever, and to constantly develop our skyline. What does it mean for heritage? Before we even talk about real estate and heritage, I think the current scenario that we have in Pakistan is more like real estate versus heritage. So there's this constant tension between whether to preserve heritage or should we just let it demolish and build something new on it. Now, heritage is an essential part of the social fabric of our society and can play an important role in not only economic development, but also to create more inclusive cities, communities, and create a distinct identity. Now, most cities have a distinct identity that they market on. For instance, Lahore is the city of culture, of art, Mughal heritage. But when it comes to Karachi, we don't really know what exactly is that distinct character. We can say it's the colonial history, or we can say it is a port city. But we are still in constant negotiation of what that distinct character looks like. And currently, when we think about Karachi and its colonial architecture, there's this constant tension. There's this sort of, this value that heritage cannot contribute to economic development. And that's why we see more of that mindset when it comes to demolition of historic properties, in terms of illegal vandalism, in terms of occupation, etc. So why many of these heritage sites are threatened by erasure and by developers and in forms of neglect has to do a lot with the mindset that heritage is something of the past. It does not have any value in the present and hence should not be preserved. And this is where real estate comes in, because it produces this very flowery and beautiful image that, our cities can be more modern and more progressive in terms of tall buildings. And this is something that you can see at the bottom right of the slide, where you have this colonial infrastructure, and right at the back, you have this really tall building, which is by the name of, which is being developed by Paragon developers who have no understanding or no expertise in heritage or how to deal with, places which have a historic character. So you see so many of these examples springing up in the old town in southern quarters. And what this does is that it creates a very capitalistic notion on cities, that our cities are meant to be developed. It means it has to be very modern, and creates an illusion for the upper middle class or the elite class that is constantly striving to have this kind of lifestyle instead of reusing and adapting the existing historic structure we have. So what is currently happening in Pakistan, in particularly in Karachi, is that we are constantly developing each area into a commercial zone without really thinking of the historic character of that area or that street or that neighborhood. So when it comes to preservation of heritage in Karachi or in Pakistan, it's constantly equated with beautification or gentrification. However, this does not have to be the case, where heritage can easily be incorporated into what the communities think of their current identity, and does not have to lead to that gentrification. But that only means that the community and other relevant stakeholders have to be involved in the real estate process and the development project processes as well, which is not currently happening. So as you're aware that most of the land or most of the buildings in Karachi are constantly facing unauthorized demolition despite being listed as heritage. Now, this is a constant threat to the future of heritage and what it means to have a historical in Karachi. And the picture on the bottom right of the slide is a very good example of what is constantly happening to different historic buildings in Karachi, where they're converted into unsympathetic features. And it only results in the loss of not only heritage heritage styles and architecture, but also to the historic fabric and the different stories that are associated with those buildings. Now, just giving that idea of what real estate has been doing in Pakistan in terms of heritage as well, I think it's very important to talk about Gwadar, and that's what most of my research has been based on. As you know, that Gwadar is currently equated with CPEC and its pristine sandy beaches. But when we talk about Gwadar, we don't really hear about its historic urban architecture or the rich history not only the city, but the region has. This is a picture of the construction of East Bay Expressway, which is part of the CPEC project, and this construction is taking place only a kilometer away from the old town of Gwadar. The old town of Gwadar has two historic forts within the Smiley Mohalla, the neighborhood that I've been focusing on, which is adjacent to the Shahi Bazaar. One of the forts, which is on the left side of the slide, is an Omani fort, and the other fort that is displayed on the right-hand side is also an Omani fort, but it is outside of the old town of Gwadar, and it is situated near the GDA offices. The old town of Mohalla has a very indigenous architecture, and it is influenced, since it's a port city, it is influenced by different architectural styles such as East African, Portuguese, and local Balochi architectural traditions as well. So here are a few images of what the architecture of Smiley Mohalla looks like. On the left-hand side, you can see that there's a walkway between two houses in the Smiley Mohalla. And this is very unique because I've never seen this architecture in Pakistan. Then on the right-hand side, you can see that the Smiley Mohalla is characterized as narrow streets, and it has these buttresses coming out of the house, which are projecting outside, and they are holding wooden lattice balconies. And here's an example of the balconies that I've been talking about. And most of the architecture inside the Smiley Mohalla and the Shahi Bazaar is built with wooden roof beam. It has straw mats. And then uske saath milke, they have used the pahari mitti that you can find in Gwadar on Kohe Batil. So they have used these traditional architectural elements to construct houses. And now all of this cultural heritage is sort of under threat because of the development by CPEC. In Smiley Mohalla, you can also find these doors which have carved center posts. And this is something that is very distinct in Indian Ocean regions. The stone town of Zanzibar is quite known for its distinct and detailed carved doors and center posts. Even though jo Gwadar mein milte hain, they're not that detailed and as intricate as the ones we found in Gwadar. But these are still a really important part of the historic fabric and environment of Gwadar and what it means to be a part of the port city and the Indian Ocean region widely. But because of neglect and a lot of migration that has taken place over the years, this historic fabric has been crumbling down. And here are some of the pictures that you can see. Even though it's crumbling down, dilapidated, I think the major threat that we face in the Smiley Mohalla is of modernization and of what it means to live in a very modern property. So in the center of the slide, you can see there's an example of a house which was recently restored, even though it's renovated. But people who live in these traditional housing, this is their ideal of living in modern apartments. So how do you really deal with this constant pressure of progress and modernity that we are facing in Karachi, that we are facing in Gwadar? Because this building is very unsympathetic with the rest of the buildings that we find in the Smiley Mohalla and the Shahi Bazaar. But for the owners themselves, it's not a big deal because they don't really think that they have done much damage to the historic fabric. For them, this is more like, we are progressing with our lives. So how do we really cater to these changes and understand what's happening in Gwadar right now in relation to CPEC and what it would mean for its heritage? Now, even though GDA has recently introduced this rehabilitation program of the old town, under which they will be restoring and rehabilitating some of the historic buildings, not just within the Mohalla, but outside of the old town as well. And an example of this is the British Telegraph office building. And this is what the proposed plan looks like. However, there's no such information available on GDA's website. There's lack of transparency on what heritage would look like, who are the relevant stakeholders who will be part of, deciding the heritage, the fabric, and what that preservation would look like. Now, the important issue in Smiley Mohalla and the Shahi Bazaar is that there's competing claims of ownership. The Smiley Mohalla, even though while it has those two historic forts that are GDA's current focus when it comes to rehabilitation, but it also houses the Smiley Jamaat Khana. Now, Smiley Jamaat Khana is a sacred place of worship. If GDA is planning to restore the entire area and make it a tourist destination zone, what would that mean for the community over there? How do you regulate tourism? Currently, there are no conversations that are happening with the community who are living inside the Mohalla. Before GDA announced their this rehabilitation program, back in 2005, when they first introduced their Smart Port City Master Plan for Gwadar, they had initially planned to demolish the entire old town and incorporate it into the port. But after a lot of backlash by the community, GDA has now finally thought about, rehabilitating the historic core. But as of now, we don't really know what that would look like for Gwadar. Before, the consultants that were hired to rehabilitate the historic town, they had no experience of working with heritage buildings. They had nobody who was an expert or a professional in heritage as well. But currently, now the consultants or the entire rehabilitation process is spearheaded by Dr. Kalimullah Lashari and his team. So this is definitely a good step for Gwadar when it comes to preserving his historic fabric. But still, we're quite unsure of what that would look like, because if a lot of tourists are coming in, then how do you really regulate? How do you ensure that the community's privacy and identity is also maintained? Like I was mentioning, that since there's no community consultation right now, the community is also under a lot of anxiety, because since the government has not really communicated कि हम ग्वादर को या उसके old town को हम rehabilitate करेंगे और उसको tourist destination zone बनाएंगे, तो community तक ये बात अब तक पहुंची नहीं है. उनके दिमाग में अभी तक यही है कि ना, जब ये पूरा process start होगा तो they might be asked to evict their houses, their properties on which they have been living for over 100 years, या उनकी आबा अजदाद रह रहे थे वहां पे. तो इस वजह से, due to the fear of eviction, the community is also not repairing any of these historic properties that they're living in, because they're like, हमें eventually हमें निकाला जाएगा, तो हम क्यों पैसे खर्च करें इन properties को मरम्मत करने के लिए, रिपेयर करने के लिए या मेंटेन करने के लिए. एंड बहुत सारे लोग जो अभी मोहल्ला में रह रहे हैं, they hardly pay any rent. उनका रेंट तकरीबन 50 रुपए होगा, 100 रुपए होगा, एंड उससे आप really ये इतनी important historic preservation नहीं कर सकते. So these are all these claims that are happening, these are all these issues that are happening, and there's so many competing claims, because जो मोहल्ले में properties हैं, they belong to the individuals themselves who have now migrated abroad, or they belong to the Aga Khan Foundation, or they belong to the Jamaat Khana. तो GDA के कब्जे में कोई भी ये properties नहीं है. तो अगर GDA उन properties पे कब्जा करता है, तो what will that mean for the community that lives inside, because it is a living heritage and it should be treated as living heritage. So these are some of the issues that I'm trying to understand, to research, to explore when it comes to Gwadar and its built heritage. Now, having said all of that, I think it's very important to really understand that heritage and real estate can go hand in hand. They're not isolated. And when we think about heritage and we think about any area, we have to think about investing in a place instead of an isolated building. Because most of the development or real estate projects that are happening in Pakistan, that's an understanding of the place. We tend to see things in isolation. So for instance, अगर सदर में कोई एक बिल्डिंग तामीर की जा रही है जिसके इर्द गिर्द सारे हेरिटेज प्रॉपर्टीज हैं, तो वी डोंट थिंक कि वो प्रॉपर्टी किस तरह से कम्युनिटी को बेनिफिट करेगी, किस तरह से उसका कैरेक्टर इन्हांस करेगी. इंस्टेड वी ओनली थिंक ऑफ एन इंडिविजुअल बिल्डिंग एंड वो हमारे लिए क्या प्रॉफिट्स लाएगी और उसके लिए क्या बेनिफिट्स होंगे. When जब आप किसी historic area में काम करते हैं, I've been working in the heritage sector in the UK for a year or two now, and कोई भी area में काम करने से पहले you have to do a character assessment of that area, just to analyze के उस area को उसकी unique features क्या है, उसका distinct character क्या है, and जो भी आप प्रोजेक्ट प्रपोज कर रहे हो वो किस तरह से उसके कैरेक्टर को इन्हांस करेगा, किस तरह से उसकी कम्युनिटी की लाइफ इम्प्रूव करेगा और किस तरह से उसका कैरेक्टर, उस एरिया का कैरेक्टर काफी डायनामिक हो सकता है. बट in Karachi, in Pakistan, we don't see that happening. And most of these development projects that we see, for instance, Ravi urban development project, it has a lot of environmental impacts as well. But we fail to take these into account. Even Gwadar में जब East Bay Expressway तामीर हो रहा था, तो उसका even though लफ्जी तौर पे environmental impact assessment किया गया था, but जब मैंने GDA के साथ इंटरव्यू किया उनकी कुछ मेंबरान के साथ, उन्होंने कहा कि वो EIA तो बस आपको पता है हम कराची पाकिस्तान में किस तरह से काम करते हैं, बस हो गया. उसको आप चैलेंज कर सकते हो उसके रिगर को और सब, लेकिन बस उसके लफ्जी तौर पे EIA है and they have been given an approval to create this 19-kilometer stretch of land like very near to the historic property, so which can really damage जब heavy traffic आएगी उसका noise pollution होगा सब कुछ. So we don't think about all of these aspects when it comes to heritage in terms of development or real estate. Now, as I said, real estate and heritage can go hand in hand because it has a lot of economic benefits. When we invest in heritage, we also invest in socio-economic and cultural development. And real estate, I think a very good example is TDF Ghar, where they have reused and sort of restored that building and given it a new purpose for people to enjoy, uska revenue generate. So it's a very good model to take into account when we talk about real estate and heritage. And in terms of that, now even when it comes to climate change, it's very, very essential that when we talk about real estate and heritage, we need to reuse the already existing properties instead of demolishing it. Because जो हमारे पास इतने अरसों से buildings चली आ रही है, अभी तक वो खड़ी नहीं है, इसका मतलब ये है कि they are built in such a way that they can, you know, sustain all of these pressures of time, of the weather, everything. So we need to think about how can we further extend their life and how can we make them more durable instead of demolishing it and releasing more carbon into the atmosphere. Because जो भी हम construction कर रहे हैं, it's with concrete and cement, which is a big no-no when it comes to historic preservation and when it comes to heritage properties. So how do we really think about all of these things when we are talking about real estate? And currently, the situation is that जब भी real estate की बात होती है, there's lack of communication and coordination between the developers, between the heritage professionals and the community. So a merger, a marriage between real estate and heritage can only happen when all of these stakeholders are involved in the decision-making process, when we reuse and retrofit the existing buildings instead of demolishing what's already out there. And to really understand how can a building can benefit not only the area, but also create a distinctive identity of that city, and how it can benefit in terms of economic development of the country as well. So I think this table by Historic England's publication on heritage and economy is very good when it comes to understanding the economic value of heritage, because we need
Just
to
a time
really,
check, Shaheera.
yeah, because we really need to understand that heritage is not, um, I mean, it's not isolated from the economic development. It can. And I think when initially jab heritage properties को list किया गया था in Karachi में, a lot of property owners who were living in those heritage property, they went on to delist their properties. One of the reasons was because they didn't see any value of living in those heritage properties. So I think this mindset needs to change when we talk about real estate, heritage, and its preservation. So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you so
I
much,
was
Shaheera, for a really interesting perspective on real estate and heritage. Just to conclude the talk, I mean, these were some eminent queries, and again, thank you so much for sharing your Gwadar research. Really made me think of the Seti Mohalla in Peshawar, those bridge connectors. I remember when I was working in Peshawar, especially in the Seti Mohalla, we saw these amazing connectors, which were like, connecting each household. So the women could, it was like a pardadari, they didn't have to come down to the public pedestrian. They were just connected from the top, and they could go from houses to houses. And this was a very special kind of circulation. And so, yeah, I mean, these influences one sees, and, other images where there was a little bit of heritage conservation work done in Gwadar, again, reminded me of Old Town of Zanzibar, where again, one sees like those port cities influences. And it's quite dynamic, like any city like Karachi or a city which is a coastal city, it becomes a transit space where people come in and out, bringing their own flavors and discussions and living standards of what they have left behind or they would like the area to be. And real estate itself is, I mean, we shouldn't forget that there's a lot of social issues. I mean, it is a living city, it is a living heritage. I mean, these are not like pause spaces. These are constantly growing, and people are living. There are the commercial areas, some are residential areas, or some are multi-purpose spaces or mixed use. Down uske niche wahan pe commercial hai, to upar residential hai. और इस dynamic के तहत how does the heritage play an eminent role? It's just like, how corporate companies, and they're giving back to the city. There's this, and we are so like right now obsessed with the idea of public-private partnership. So does like real estate take that kind of umbrella system or umbrella approach of co-learning or coexisting between development as well as historic spaces? How can they be stitched? And the questions that you raised in your presentation were quite something that we all are working towards and thinking, and how can the urban planning be incorporated in those areas? So it's not about just preserving for the sake of preservation or controlling a very nostalgic or a romantic perspective of Old Town, but it is also an ideology of how does the scale signify, right? So if there is a high rise and there is a ground plus 3 structure, what is the relationship between the two? And that verticality is something that we are constantly trying to research and understand. So I'm going to request my team to step in and ask questions, and then we will open up to our audience. If you have any questions, please post them in the chat box and we will read them out. and we will open it up to you all to ask a question. So just please raise your, there's a marker there where you can raise your like a hand, and then we can ask you to please be part of our conversation. It needs to be more interactive. So Josefa.
Assalamu alaikum. It was a wonderful presentation. I had a few questions regarding this. You tackled the idea pretty well about real estate and heritage working hand in hand. So I wanted to ask, how do you propose that heritage buildings, as Ma'am Marvi just talked about, have a verticality that is lower than like newer development high rises? So the newer developments also in a more efficient way cater to housing needs, especially in urban cities like Karachi, and as Gwadar is being pushed forward in Gwadar as well. So how do you see the balancing act between needing to needing to fix the housing crisis in urban cities and protecting the heritage at the same time?
Thank you, Huzefa, for a very interesting question. There are a couple of things. When we talk about heritage preservation, here the need to protect the city's heritage, we're not saying कि इमारतें या modernization नहीं होनी चाहिए, ठीक है? We understand that Karachi is a growing urban city and there's a severe crisis for housing, for water, and all of these facilities that comes with urbanization. जो हमारे पास already historic buildings हैं Karachi में, most of them are in a very desperate need for care and repair and for maintenance. And some of them are even vacant. Now, when we already have these housing crises, okay, and instead of really addressing the need, what is happening right now is कि हम कह रहे हैं कि housing crisis है, so we will go find a land and build more tall buildings instead of really using the already existing buildings that we can have, which can also sort of release the burden in terms of our expenditure on construction, on investment as well. So, जो main idea है of historic preservation का, especially when it comes to urban cities, it has a lot to do with adaptive reuse and retrofitting. तो किस तरह से हम जो already existing building है, so किस तरह से हम reuse कर सकें, adapt कर सकें to address the growing needs of housing, or not just housing, but also जो हमारे पास because we are a commercial city and there's a lot of businesses and startups also, and how can they also use these historic buildings as their spaces? So I think this is the very important thing that we need to understand कि हम किस तरह से जो existing structure है उसको वापस use कर सकें. And इसके अंदर बहुत सारी एक और ये भी चीज़ है कि जो already उन जगहों में उन areas में उन buildings में रह रहे हैं, they currently do not have any guidance or any sort of awareness कि किस तरह से हम अपनी properties को repair कर सकें, किस तरह से अपनी properties को maintain कर सकें. तो इसके लिए काफ़ी basic ground level पे जाके एक तो अवेयरनेस होनी चाहिए इसके बारे में, ऊपर से दूसरा गवर्नमेंट के इदारों को इसके ऊपर एक हैंडबुक होनी चाहिए कि किस तरह से हम हिस्टोरिक प्रॉपर्टीज को रिपेयर कर सके, किस तरह से मेंटेन कर सके, कौन से आर्किटेक्चरल फीचर्स इंपॉर्टेंट है. एंड कुछ जगहों पे जब हिस्टोरिक प्रॉपर्टीज यूज की गई हैं तो उसके अंदर जो रिपेयर वर्क है, दे आर वेरी sort of intrusive to the architectural styles that are found in those heritage buildings. So how can we really create sort of an environment which is more conducive to repair, caring, and maintenance of those historic properties? So I think this is something that I would like to add to the question that you have posed.
Yeah. Do you, Aksar, would you like to come into the question?
Yes. Thank you, Shaheera, for such a detailed presentation on Gwadar, Karachi, and real estate and development and heritage. I have noted a couple of things down that you said throughout your presentation. I think perhaps बहुत basic चीज से ही मैं एक question in fact नहीं है बल्कि एक discussion का point है which I would like to put forward. Basically, whenever we speak of heritage, generally हमारे लोगों को इतना आइडिया नहीं है because this is a very new topic जो आजकल बहुत इस पे फिर भी थोड़ा बहुत बात होती है. And when it comes to cities like Gwadar, people have pretty much absolutely no idea about its historical nature, its character, and its communities. और उनके जो वहाँ पे anxiety, as you mentioned, वहाँ पे already लोगों को है. जो लोग वहाँ पे रहते हैं when it comes to real estate development and the mega development projects that are taking place now. So I have a very basic thing to put forward, which is basically आपने खुद भी research बहुत किया है on large scale infrastructure and its impact on like heritage sites वगैरह. But when we speak of coastal cities like Gwadar, वहाँ पे heritage sites सिर्फ एक monument या 3D buildings वगैरह नहीं होती बल्कि वहाँ पे heritage का concept थोड़ा आगे चला जाता है and even the ecology becomes a part of heritage because Gwadar's coast has contributed so much to its character, to its history, to its oral traditions. Like Gwadar without its fisher folk community is basically nothing. तो जब लार्ज स्केल इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर हम इस टाइप के कोस्टल सिटी में लेके आते हैं तो वहाँ पे उसका इम्पैक्ट कम्युनिटीज पे क्या पड़ता है टू व्हेन इट कम्स टू देयर एक्सेस टू यू कुड से इकोलॉजिकल हेरिटेज लाइक द कोस्ट लाइन इफ throughout your research maybe you have some insights into this that you would like to share with us.
Thank you, Aksa, for this question. So there are two parts to your question. One is कि ये जो large scale infrastructure है उसका impact communities पे क्या है, and दूसरा what is an impact on the ecology, right?
Yeah.
So अब ग्वादर में communities अब किस मतलब एक fisher folk community है ग्वादर में, ठीक है, which and then you have the community which is residing in the old town, especially when it comes to Shahi Bazaar वो सब. तो वो जो at least मेरी research में the main stakeholders are the Smiley community, ठीक है. अब when I talk about the fisher folk in Gwadar and how they are being impacted by the CPEC development, इसका एक तो जब आपने ईस्ट पे एक्सप्रेसवे बनाया तो उनका एक्सेस वैसे ही कट हो गया. अब ग्वादर एक हैमरहेड पेनिनसुला पे सिचुएटेड है, so there's an east side and there's a west side, ठीक है. Now east side is mainly used to dock ships and catch and dock ships and उस तरह से, and then west side is used for catching fishes, ठीक है. तो जब east पे expressway बन गया so it cut off a lot of people's access to the sea, and most of the fisher folks were living around the East Bay. Okay, so that has had a very detrimental impact to not their only livelihood, but also there is a sense of loss as well in terms of their land, in terms of belonging. So these are some of the very important things. दूसरा, अब ग्वादर में what is happening is कि चूंकि all of these development are happening, then they're being pushed further to the periphery of Gwadar. So now they have to travel furthermore to travel to their to the coastline to catch fish, to to repair their ships or what's up. So ये दूसरी चीज है. And now Gwadar में, because of all of this protests and tensions, beach में there was this news कि Gwadar में they're going to fence it as well. So that would further cut off the communities who are living in the old town, and will create sort of a tension between old town and new town, and people will be further pushed. जिन्होंने plots खरीदे हैं तो वो अब ग्वादर के बाहर हो गए हैं, तो ये सारी tensions हैं. दूसरा, when it comes to Smiley community and in Gwadar and their impact on heritage, जैसे कि मैंने अपनी presentation में कहा था कि there's lack of trust towards GDA and what their notion of heritage preservation or rehabilitation looks like. अब तक कोई community consultation नहीं हुई है GDA की तरफ से कि हम यहाँ पे एक रिहैबिलिटेट करेंगे, एक टूरिस्ट डेस्टिनेशन जोन बनाएंगे। जब 2020 में मैं GDA के साथ इंटरव्यूज कर रही थी, तो उन्होंने उस वक्त सोच रहे थे कि हमें ग्वादर को, उसके ओल्ड टाउन को एक डेस्टिनेशन जोन बनाना है, उसके हेरिटेज को प्रमोट करना है, ठीक है। तो उस वक्त उन्होंने सरसरी तौर पे मुझे कहा था कि हम स्माइली मोहल्ला में एक म्यूजियम बनाएंगे, या फिर हम कुछ और करेंगे जस्ट टू क्रिएट मोर टूरिस्ट। बट दैट जस्ट शोस के दैट दे हैवंट रियली थॉट अबाउट कि जो कम्युनिटी ऑलरेडी रह रही है उनके साथ क्या होगा। क्या आप उनको बोलेंगे कि आप यहाँ से एविक्ट करें ताकि हम टूरिस्ट के लिए एक डेस्टिनेशन जोन बनाए, ताकि हम प्रॉपरली उस जगह से रेवेन्यू अर्न करें, या फिर आप उन कम्युनिटी के साथ मिल के बैठ के कोई डेवलपमेंट प्रपोजल बनाए कि हम किस तरह से एक तो कम्युनिटी की आइडेंटिटी को, उनके हेरिटेज को प्रोटेक्ट करें, साथ ही साथ हम टूरिज्म के लिए भी एक स्पेस क्रिएट करें कि ताकि इकोनॉमिक जनरेशन, रेवेन्यू क्रिएट हो। लेकिन फिलहाल इस तौर पे कोई भी कॉन्वर्जेशंस नहीं हुई है, एंड दैट्स व्हाई द कम्युनिटी इज आल्सो रिलक्टेंट to really do any sort of repair and maintenance work. They like हम क्यों करें जब हमें eventually वो निकाला जाए, they will kick us out. And even अभी ये भी है कि जो स्माइली मोहल्ला है वहाँ पे there's a lot of drug addicts that are stealing those historic properties. So there is a sense of fear as well. And when jo bhi development hui hai, it's not happening in the old town at all. वो सिर्फ CPEC जहाँ तक रूट जाता है, तो उसके एरिया तक या उन जगहों पे उन्होंने डेवलपमेंट किए, रोड्स बनाए हैं. तो आई थिंक these are some of the impacts जो community की तरफ से हो रहे हैं, and the community are still sort of trying to understand कि हो क्या रहा है ग्वादर में, और उनकी properties को क्या होगा. क्योंकि अगर let's say अगर उनको evict किया भी जाता है, जब न्यू टाउन में plots distribute हो रहे थे गवर्नमेंट की तरफ से to different people, the Smiley community or the people who are living in the old town, they were not allocated any plot in the new town. तो अगर उनको evict कर दिया जाएगा तो वो कहाँ जाएंगे, उनके पास कोई plots नहीं है. जैसे जिस तरह से ग्वादर को और उसकी इकोनॉमी को और CPEC को प्रमोट किया जा रहा है, तो most of the plots have been sold out. हालांकि इतनी डेवलपमेंट नहीं हुई है न्यू टाउन ऑफ ग्वादर में, लेकिन फिर भी जब अब उन लोगों की eviction होगी या फिर एक्चुअली काम स्टार्ट होगा प्रेजर्वेशन का और टूरिस्ट डेस्टिनेशन जोन बनाया जाएगा शाही बाजार को या मोहल्ले को, तो अगर लोगों को evict किया जाएगा तो वो where will they go? So these are all of these
Yeah.
questions that are
Yeah, these are I mean, here it reminds me of a very important thing, which is economic crisis brings a lot of baggage and vandalism, and I don't think like this kind of we witnessed the same thing in Karachi's old town as well. And I mean, addiction or homelessness, these are all economic crises which kind of bring in this approach. And I think like from a social justice point of view, it is the governance which is ruptured, and we got to understand that this is what they can retrieve and sell in the market, and that's why half of the grills in Old Town have also been destroyed. But yeah, I mean, these are thanks for asking this question, Aksa. It also makes me understand that Gwadar is a land which has a lot of indigenous information, knowledge, inherited history, and right now a company is designing something over there from a very outsider's perspective, top down. How much research has been conducted? How much work is there out there, which is part of the urban planning and designing? And it also makes me think that old town, new town, what does it mean? These are some of the words that we keep on using it because we've been inherited these words: old town, new town, and then native towns. These are all words that been in our colonial dictionary. And I think it's now the time that we need to readjust and rethink. Historic quarters are incorporated in this modern living. How does that stitch in? Again, Fiza, do you have any questions, or should we just open it to public now and ask if anybody wants to ask a question so that we can wrap up in next 10 minutes?
No, I guess there's a question in the chat box that Shaheera need to address, which says that the heritage sites which are neither in condition to be preserved nor conserved, what can the approach for preserving the identities of such sites?
This is a dilemma actually that I'm facing right now, because I mean, जो बहुत सारी sites जो स्माइली मोहल्ला में बाजार में they have literally crumbled down. ठीक है, उनका कोई नामो निशान ही नहीं है. Instead of, I mean, you wouldn't even know कि वहाँ पे कोई historic property थी unless there was some rubble that testifies कि हाँ यहाँ पे कोई रहता था, यहाँ पे किसी की दुकान थी. ठीक है, तो now when GD is also involved and I've been researching on heritage and its preservation in Gwadar, this is a very important question. What do you do with sites that are already in a state of, you know, which like in a state of disrepair in a way, ठीक है, जो already like, you know, टूट चुकी हैं वो सब. So there are two ways to go about this. एक तो, when I think about Smiley Mohalla, there are about 57 plots inside the mohalla. उसके अंदर both जो already existing है, proper हालत में है, and कुछ जो बल्कि टूट चुके हैं. ठीक है, तो अगर इसको हम proper as living heritage देखते हैं, या उसको हम tourist zone देखते हैं, I think a good way, and just my opinion, is कि जो sites already have completely collapsed, there's no point in investing money and sort of remaking what it used to be, because that would only cost you a lot of money, which GDA does not have, and is currently looking for different investors and organizations who will be interested in restoring and rehabilitating the area. So my idea or my opinion is that the properties that have already sort of crumbled down, let it be the way it was, and instead you create some sort of like, you know, a trail or a memory about all of these places ke yahan pe so and so person used to live, or this property served this and this purpose, and jo already properties, they're in slightly better condition, you restore them, you reuse them, you retrofit them. तो एक ये तरीका है. दूसरा, जो GDA फिलहाल उसका आइडिया है of rehabilitation of Shahi Bazaar and the Mohalla, they are only looking at facades. They only want to repair and maintain and restore the facades of the building and not really care about the interior. And this is very problematic. And it's something that we also see in Karachi, and even the laws that we have, they also say कि बस आपको facade को maintain करना है, बाकी फिर property owners पे है या जो भी उसका like, you know, stakeholder है उस जगह का, they have to look. So this is what GDA's approach is towards rehabilitation. And I think when it comes to preserving the identities of the site, a good way could be to have some sort of a museum or some sort of like, you know, a plaque that really tells you the story of that area, because it is has such rich history, and it's so diverse because there are a lot of different people who are coming into Gwadar before when Gwadar became a part of Pakistan. So it has Omani soldiers who would guard the area. You have a lot of people coming in from East Africa. You have slaves as well who are part and parcel of the Shahi Bazaar. So these are all of these histories that can be, you know, sort of preserved in terms of when you sort of rehabilitate or restore even one single heritage property, which talks about all of these histories, instead of trying to make use of all the properties that are already like crumbled down. I think I personally
and that's
think
where when you
it's
started
worth
off
investment.
when you started off your presentation, you talked about intangible and tangible. And just to like add on to this query of when there is neither any condition, that's where from our like my practice experience, it comes a heritage value. You grade the building, and the grading is what defines whether this building needs to be delisted, and that's where the phenomena of delisting and value add comes in. You there's a whole method to it that you calculate how many aesthetic value this building has, and if it falls into a certain category, you take it towards rehabilitation. And if it doesn't falls into that add value, then you say you delist it, and you kind of like, जैसे कहते हैं कि तख्ती को शहीद कर दिया, या जब कोई चीज बहुत ज्यादा, it's like in a non-repair condition, you let it go, and that's what it is. But then the sad part is that some of the very solid structures get into that politics of delisting, and that's something we're going to talk in the next session. And I hope you all tune into Mariam Nizam's session, and she's going to talk about these policies and these gaps which kind of maneuver into these voids, and which lead up to making these certain decisions which are very political, and I hope you can learn from that. Here I would like to open up to the public. If there's anybody, any audience who would like to ask a question, please be part of this discussion.
Marvi, just wanted to add something to this, because we were talking about a lot of heritage properties in Gwadar. I think it's very important to state that koi bhi property Gwadar mein is not listed. So
yeah, because Gwadar doesn't have a policy intact, which is very active.
Yeah, so even though the current laws or even GDA ki town and building regulations hai, or Balochistan as a province has their own cultural heritage policy, none of these buildings in Gwadar, the old town, they're not listed, do not have any sort of protection at all. But now with GDA trying to rehabilitate the area, they're thinking about listing these buildings. So as Marvi said, when we talk about preservation and what to do with those sites, there are different grades, grade 1, grade 2, grade 3, जो भी आप define करते हैं, तो उस हिसाब से या तो आप delist करते हैं या repairs करते हैं या उसको इतनी importance दी जाती है. So I just wanted to add this.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. So should we ask, I mean, is anybody interested to ask a question? Yes, Rida, would you like to, please? You have to unmute yourself.
Hi, sorry, should I type in my question or is it okay?
No, just speak up. We're open to the public now. Come on.
Okay, great. All right, perfect. Firstly, thank you to Marvi and to the whole team for organizing this. This is amazing to be able to come together and talk, especially I think for people like me who are far away from Pakistan but try to stay connected somehow. It's great to be part of this discussion. To Shaheera, I was wondering if you could give an example maybe of a good practice or a situation where a place where a certain situation was present. I mean, you're talking here about the outlook or the situation from both sides, right? With the community and their maybe sort of hesitation to work on their property versus GDA and their lack of resources, or if I can take the liberty to say maybe even a lack of priority to give some attention to this. Has there been a similar sort of situation where some kind of an approach has been successful, where spaces have been preserved or reused or refurbished successfully? I mean, here I'm talking I'm talking about the South Asian context where you're thinking of lack of resources, lack of maybe interest, also keeping all of those things in mind and maybe trying to search for direction, like what can we do? Simply put, what do we do now?
That's a very heavy question, Rida. What do we do? No, that's all right. I mean, it's $1 million question. What should we do? And because when we're talking about all of these, preservation of historic sites, we also obviously look towards good practices that are out there. especially when it comes to the case of Gwadar, I think what the best practice would be to look at what different Indian Ocean regions have done when it comes to preserving their heritage. Now, JDA keeps giving the example of Muscat, where they have restored their bazaar, which is also very similar in terms of to how Gwadar is also, planned out. So, wahan pe bhi there's a port, and then next to the port there's this bazaar. So GDA keeps giving example of Matra Bazaar as a model towards heritage preservation. But according to me, it's not more of a preservation of heritage over there. It's more of like trying to recreate the past. And this is something that is similar in Qatar as well. When you roam around the streets of Souq Waqif, which are trying to really hold to their Indian Ocean past. So I think Zanzibar is a very good example when it comes to preservation of heritage of their stone town, where they have not only tried to make use of the existing properties, but have also involved the community in their decision-making process. So all of these stakeholders were involved when it came to, preserving the character of the old town, and they have really made use of the buffer zones as well when it comes to, developing any other sort of tall building. So I think these are Zanzibar is one place that I would definitely look at when it comes, especially when it comes to Gwadar. For a model for heritage preservation.
Thanks. Manal, would you like to ask the question, please? We can't hear you. Manal, we don't hear you. Do you want to ask the question?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes.
Okay, firstly, I'd like to thank you for organizing this, and it's such a great platform. I actually like to know that since we're talking about the coastal heritage, we do have the peninsula of Manora in Karachi, and which has become the talk of the town after its coastal development right now. But when I personally carried out the research on Manora and I interviewed the people who are residing over there, especially of the old Saliabad, so they were very unhappy with the coastal development. They felt that the sea has been commercialized, and they felt as a threat to their own property. Plus, they feel like a lot of tourists would be pouring in, and then their own heritage is being under threatened. Also, what they discussed with us was that the government, they only developed the old Moripur road instead of the ferries. So they've said that the ferries हैं वो उनकी एक historic route है. The government didn't plan on developing the transportation route, but उन्होंने वो Moripur road जो था उसको develop कर दिया, and they felt that the whole real estate development is not beneficial to them. So I'd like to put in the idea over here that maybe we could all work out on how the old historic routes could be redesigned in a way that they could also be preserved rather than just the routes that are only beneficial to the tourist. And I think that is also a very integral part of the heritage restoration.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's a great comment. I mean, I think it's not a question, but more like a comment. And thanks for sharing that. I mean, if you are researching over there, please write to us. We would love to invite you for this, and you can share your work. It's absolutely critical to look at all the historic neighborhoods and towns and spaces and lands and islands. Right now, the most critical conversation is happening for Malir at the moment, and there is a bypass that's crossing, and there is a conversation that's what's going to happen. So routes are a very important element of a query, that what's going to happen on its sides. So yeah, thanks for that comment. Anybody else would like to ask before we conclude our conversation? We are already 5 minutes above our session. Okay, I think there's none. So I would like to thank you, Shaheera, for taking out your time and sharing your work with us. I would like to thank my team, Aksa, Fiza, Huzaifa. You guys were quite incredible with me, and thank you for sparing and your time and your headspace, and the audience. Thank you so much for coming at 9 o'clock, and you know, that's a time when usually everyone is crawling and heading towards Netflix and dinner and sleeping. So I hope I see you all next time as well. Please come to our next session, which is equally really challenging and important. And next 8 sessions, we will be sharing our program on Instagram. Take a screenshot, save it, put the dates in your calendar. And I hope we all stay connected and keep this conversation going. Have a really good night. Thank you so much, Shaheera. Lots of love.
Thank you so
Take care.
much, Marvi.
Bye.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.